How's it going, everyone? This is Erica's for the win, and this is going to be a video comparing Dark Souls 3 with Bloodborne. When people were asking me questions about Dark Souls 3, a lot of the questions were centered around Bloodborne because a lot of people really like that game, and they wanted to know how it compares, what's different between the two. If they are a huge Bloodborne fan, would they like Dark Souls 3? Ultimately, I'm hoping this video can help you see the differences and possibly influence your decision on buying this game. As with anything, if you are trying to avoid spoilers, I highly recommend not watching this video. I'm not going to outright spoil things about the story or the bosses, their names, or anything like that, but I am going to talk about the combat. I am going to talk about certain things that define these games and how they're going to compare. Obviously, I'm going to have to talk about the gameplay, the graphics, the bosses in terms of how they play and how hard they are and things like that. So if you're trying to avoid anything and you want it to be a total surprise, I don't blame you. I would do the same thing, and I had been doing that until I got the game, so I get it. So I'm just warning you right now, I'm not going to just flat out spoil things, but I am going to talk about Dark Souls 3, so obviously you're going to get a lot of info here. You can come back after you play or however you want to do it. So let's just go ahead and get into this. So first, let's talk about the combat speed and just the overall pace of Dark Souls 3. In order to do that, we need to take a look at Dark Souls as a whole and just what motivates that character. What kind of playstyle does the game encourage to that character, and how does that compare to Bloodborne? I think this is really going to help us to understand just the overall differences between the two, Dark Souls and Bloodborne, and hopefully it'll answer the question of where does Dark Souls 3 fall into place. So first of all, with Dark Souls, if you've heard anything about Dark Souls as a series, you know that it's more of a slower pace, okay? It's more defensive. The gameplay actually really encourages it because you have shields for one. Bloodborne didn't really have any shields. There was a wooden shield which didn't do anything, so there's a big difference there. With Bloodborne, the character's motivations are definitely more aggressive. You're a hunter. You're a skilled professional, and your job is to just go kill, and you end up getting bloodthirsty and drunk on blood, and it just makes you more powerful. With Dark Souls, it's more of a David and Goliath kind of thing. I've heard this term thrown around a lot when it comes to Dark Souls because you're this just random person who, you know, is kind of thrown into this world. You're going up against these huge monsters, this crazy, you know, area, and you're just kind of thrown in there trying to figure out what to do and trying to figure out your place in the world. Whereas with Bloodborne, like I said, you're skilled, you're trained to kill, and you're out there on the hunt, just hunting these beasts. So there's definitely a difference there just between Dark Souls and Bloodborne when it comes to the character motivations. And that, of course, ties in with the speed of the game, because obviously if you're going to be aggressive, it's going to feel much faster. Whereas with being a defensive player, using your shield, rolling away, kind of keeping your distance and trying to figure out the enemy's patterns and things like that, it slows it down. And that's why Dark Souls feels much slower compared to Bloodborne, because it's more calculated, it's more precise, every little move matters, every block matters with your shield, and like I said, with it just having shields in general really encourages you to use one and be defensive. Whereas with Bloodborne, you're encouraged to be more aggressive because you guys know if you play Bloodborne, if you get hit and then you hit back immediately, your health will regen. So it's encouraging you to be aggressive. So those are definitely the two differences that we need to start with to understand, okay, that's the differences between the two. Where does Dark Souls 3 fall into place on the spectrum? So I went ahead and made a graph for you guys, and it's kind of gimpy, but it kind of just illustrates where I'm going with this, okay? So you have Dark Souls on the left, that's saying Dark Souls 1 and 2, and then Bloodborne on the right. So where does Dark Souls 3 fall into place? For me, I say it's right here. And as you can see, it's leaning more towards the Dark Souls side because it definitely still feels like Dark Souls. And I'm sure a lot of you guys will be relieved to hear that, because I know there's some Dark Souls fans who really want it to stay Dark Souls, and I'm with you guys. I wanted that too. But to have that little flavor, that spice of Bloodborne thrown onto it, it's just even better. And I'll probably get into that in my first impressions video or something like that, where I really get into how I'm feeling about it. Just taking something from both Dark Souls and Bloodborne and just kind of having a wonderful baby between the two. I'll get into that. So yes, this is where I would put Dark Souls 3. Like I said, it's still leaning more towards Dark Souls, but it is, you know, a little closer to Bloodborne compared to Dark Souls 1 and 2. Yeah, I think this is definitely where it belongs, and this is just my opinion. I've put in about 10 hours into the game, maybe more. By the time this video goes up, I'll put even more hours. But that's definitely where I feel Dark Souls 3 should be on this little graph that I made. So I hope this helps illustrate, you know, what I'm trying to say in this video and kind of gives you an idea. Sometimes graphs and stuff kind of help. Is this even a graph? What is this? Anyways, so yeah, that is definitely, you know, the differences in character, you know, the character motivation, the speed, all of it ties in. And I hope that helps a lot. Now, let's go ahead and get into the bosses. This is the real meat and potatoes when it comes to a Souls series. I mean, it's all about them bosses, right? So far, I've seen 3 bosses. I'm pretty sure one of them is optional. I need to find that out. But for right now, I can just only speak on these three bosses. And I'm not going to give their names away or describe them and how they look and things like that, because, you know, that's kind of, you know, too much of a spoiler. But I'm just going to talk about the overall difficulty when it comes to Dark Souls 3 bosses in comparison to Bloodborne bosses. Okay, so when it comes to the bosses in Dark Souls 3, I feel like they are definitely smarter like Bloodborne bosses, because there were a lot of bosses in Bloodborne I felt like they knew how to adjust to my playstyle, whereas with Dark Souls, it was more about me adjusting to them. They were kind of doing their own thing, doing their own pattern, and yeah, if I got close, they would switch it up or something like that. If I got far, they would do some kind of ranged attack. But other than that, if I was behind them, most of them were just kind of lost. They didn't know I was back there. I could do damage being back there. And that was kind of one of the main, I guess, tactics to use on Dark Souls bosses. They were kind of dumb at times, I feel like. You know, some of them were really hard. I'm not taking anything away from some of the hard ones, but there were a lot that, you know, weren't really difficult because I felt like they weren't adjusting to what I was doing. But with Bloodborne, damn, they really adjusted many times. Like Ludwig, for example, you guys know, if you fought Ludwig, you know that guy goes wild no matter what you do. If you're behind him, he'll just kick you. If you're in front of him, he'll have another attack for you. And it's like whatever you do, he's adjusting to you. And I feel like with Dark Souls 3, there's bosses that are already doing that. They're kind of mimicking the Bloodborne bosses as far as difficulty in that way, because they are adjusting to what I'm doing. And that makes me feel like, damn, these are smart bosses, and that's where the challenge comes in. And on top of that, they look intimidating like Bloodborne bosses. I don't know if it's just me, but there's some bosses in Dark Souls 1 and especially 2 where they just look kind of not so intimidating. Like, I didn't really feel that scared by them. Some of them are just knights that don't really have, you know, a facial expression or anything because they have a helmet. They're just this random knight, you know, trying to kill me, and I wasn't really fearful of them or anything like that. But with Dark Souls 3, that intimidation factor is definitely there. I feel like there's many times where I'm just talking out loud to myself, like saying, holy shit, and oh my gosh, like I'm just having these reactions because they're going into a different phase. They, you know, mutate to something or something like that, and it just kind of freaks me out. Or they'll come out of nowhere and scare me. Like if it's just a regular enemy, they'll kind of come out of the shadows and just get me from behind, and I had no idea they were even there. So that intimidation is definitely there. There's a lot of creepiness to Dark Souls 3, kind of the same creepiness that I felt in Bloodborne. And I think, you know, for me, that was what made Bloodborne so special, was that when it came to the graphics and the enemies and just the overall tone of the game, it was a very dark place, but it was beautiful at the same time. And so Dark Souls 3 definitely has that. I know I'm kind of going into graphics. I should probably hold off on that, but let's go back to the bosses. It's the same thing. I feel like these bosses are ugly, they're scary, They're, you know, the tone of it is just like, man, they're creepy sometimes. And so, you know, that's what kind of makes it very special. And I feel like Dark Souls 3 pushes it even further, and it's even more special. So yeah, when it comes to the bosses, there's definitely some difficulty there. There's a challenge. I think if you're a seasoned Dark Souls player, you're not going to have too much trouble, especially early on. I can't speak for the rest because I'm sure there's going to be some really hard bosses. But for the first 3 bosses that I've seen, they're not crazy hard, especially if you're familiar with Dark Souls and even Bloodborne. I think Bloodborne players will do okay. I think you'll be fine. Don't be intimidated. Even though they look intimidating, you can do it, man. It's like it gives me that same feeling that I had with Bloodborne and Dark Souls, that, you know, there's nothing that I can't overcome. Like, these guys, they have a weakness. I just gotta figure it out, and it just gives me that overall thrill to take these bosses down. And like I said, they're intimidating, they're big, they're fast, they adjust to my play style and what I'm doing, and they come back stronger, and they have different phases too. I need to mention that. They do have second phases, and that's a lot like Bloodborne. So I think when it comes to the bosses, this is where it's most like Bloodborne. So if you loved Bloodborne for the bosses, you're gonna love this game. And even if you're just a Dark Souls player and you weren't really fond of Bloodborne, I think I would be willing to bet that you can appreciate this. You can appreciate the bosses kind of taking a page from Bloodborne and being smarter, being faster, being scarier. That's definitely something to appreciate. So yeah, when it comes to the bosses, I'd say that's like the #1 thing that Dark Souls 3 has in common with Bloodborne. They're just smarter, and they're just, you know, faster, and of course that speeds up the gameplay. But like I said, you're still going to be defensive. You're still going to have that playstyle of Dark Souls. Even if you're like using magic or whatever you're doing, you're going to survey the area. You're going to calculate your moves. You have to, or else you're going to die. You know, you have to really be precise in when you roll, when you strike, all of that. You have to really, you know, get good at that. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. Those are the 2, you know, biggest things I wanted to cover first. In the next video, I'm gonna probably talk about the areas, talk about the enemies, the items. That's definitely something I should cover. So yeah, there's definitely gonna be a part 2, not sure on a 3. We'll see how this goes. If you guys have any more questions or comments or anything about Dark Souls 3 and how it compares to Bloodborne, definitely let me know. I can add them to another video. I'm also planning to do a video where I just answer general questions from you guys, because I have a few to go off of. So that's definitely in the works for another video. I hope you enjoyed this and it was informative. These videos are going to be fun to do, so I can't wait to do more. Thank you so much for watching, you guys. I will catch you in my next video. Peace.